The afternoon of October 4, 1943, found the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin gripped by tension. Inside the oak-paneled conference room, Reich's Marshal Hermann Göring stood before Germany's leading aircraft manufacturers. His words, captured by stenographers poised with pencils at the ready, would later become a perfect portrait of catastrophic misjudgment, the kind historians would study for generations to come. "The Americans cannot build airplanes," Göring announced with absolute certainty. "They are very good at refrigerators and razor blades." Through the expansive windows framing the room, the gathered industrialists could observe smoke curling upward from Berlin's factories. Desperate, frantic production, running around the clock to compensate for mounting Luftwaffe losses. The contrast between Göring's confidence and the visible reality below formed a bitter irony that few in that room seemed to notice. The Third Reich, though reeling from the catastrophe at Stalingrad and the collapse in North Africa, still held dominion across most of Europe. But Göring's worldview was frozen in the 1920s, shaped by outdated memories and stubborn conviction. To him, America remained fundamentally what it had been 2 decades earlier, a land of jazz bands and businessmen skilled at producing consumer luxuries, certainly not weapons capable of waging modern warfare. What Göring failed to comprehend was the industrial transformation occurring across the Atlantic at that very moment. In American shipyards, 3 Liberty ships were being launched every single day. By the time his conference concluded and the industrialists filed out of that wood-paneled room, Richmond's shipyards would have completed another vessel. Within half a year, those very Americans he dismissed would unleash 1,000-bomber formations across German skies, while their shipyards launched a new cargo vessel every 8 hours. German defeat was being calculated not through battle orders or military strategy, but through production statistics, cold, relentless numbers that revealed the fatal blindness at the foundation of Nazi planning. Göring's contempt for American industrial power did not originate in 1943. It possessed deep historical roots embedded within German military culture. As a fighter pilot in the previous war, Göring had personally shot down 22 Allied aircraft. He had observed America's belated entry into that conflict and its initially marginal contribution. The United States had arrived in World War I almost entirely lacking an air force, forced to depend on French and British machines. This memory, burned into Göring's mind through decades of reflection, became the bedrock of his fatal assumption about American capabilities. The phrase about refrigerators and razor blades evolved into his standard response whenever anyone raised questions about the American threat. He recycled variations throughout the early war years. In 1940, following France's collapse, he assured Hitler himself, "The Americans are good about making fancy cars and refrigerators, but that doesn't mean they are any good at making aircraft. They are bluffing," he insisted with characteristic arrogance. "They are excellent at bluffing." Yet Göring's delusion was not merely personal opinion. It reflected a systematic failure across German intelligence apparatus. In November 1941, Colonel Joseph Beppo, chief of Luftwaffe intelligence, submitted an analysis concluding that American aircraft production could not exceed 400 planes monthly. His reasoning appeared logical. American factories lacked the precision tooling and trained workforce necessary for military manufacturing. German naval intelligence proved equally dismissive. In January 1942, Captain Heinz Assmann reported to Admiral Raeder that American shipbuilding capacity would likely remain limited to perhaps 1 cargo vessel weekly per shipyard. "Their workers are soft," he wrote with evident disdain, "accustomed to high wages and short hours. They lack the discipline of German craftsmen." Even Hitler, while maintaining public scorn, harbored private doubts about American potential. In December 1941, he confided to his generals, "We must defeat Russia quickly. Once that is done, we can deal with America before their production becomes overwhelming." Yet Göring, the man responsible for assessing enemy air capabilities, remained locked in conviction about American industrial inferiority. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America was undergoing transformation into what Franklin Roosevelt termed the arsenal of democracy. On January 6, 1942, during his State of the Union address, Roosevelt announced production goals that sounded almost fantastical to skeptical German ears. "We shall produce 60,000 planes in this year, 1942, he declared. Next year, 1943, we shall produce 125,000 airplanes, including 100,000 combat planes." German intelligence intercepted these figures. In his diary entry for January 8, 1942, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels recorded his reaction. "I showed the Führer Roosevelt's production targets. He laughed. Pure propaganda. If they could build a tenth of these numbers, it would be a miracle." What the Germans fundamentally misunderstood was that America had been preparing since 1940. The groundwork had been laid not through military orders, but through British financial desperation. The British Purchasing Commission, frantic to replace merchant vessels being sent to the ocean floor by German U-boats, approached American industrialist Henry J. Kaiser with an extraordinary proposal: construct 60 cargo ships using mass production methods never before attempted in shipbuilding. Kaiser, a man who had never built a ship but who had completed the Hoover Dam ahead of schedule, accepted the challenge. His methods would revolutionize not merely shipbuilding, but the entire conception of wartime production itself. Rather than employing skilled craftsmen building each vessel as a unique project, Kaiser implemented prefabrication, substituted welding for riveting, and borrowed assembly line principles directly from automobile manufacturing. The Liberty ship represented deliberate simplicity by design. A 441-foot cargo vessel derived from older British patterns, powered by a triple-expansion steam engine that any competent mechanic could service. When German intelligence obtained technical drawings from a torpedoed Liberty ship in early 1942, they dismissed the design as crude and primitive. Capitan Peter Kremer wrote dismissively, "These ships are coffins, slow, ungainly, with the sailing characteristics of a brick." What Kremer completely failed to comprehend was that the Liberty ship's simplicity constituted its true genius. Every component was standardized. Every section was prefabricated in factories distributed across America, then transported to 18 separate shipyards, where they were assembled like massive three-dimensional puzzles. The learning curve accelerated rapidly. Workers who had never glimpsed a ship were surpassing veteran German shipyard workers within mere months. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, slid into the water on September 27, 1941, after 244 days of construction. German naval intelligence recorded this with satisfaction. At that pace, they calculated, Americans might construct perhaps 50 ships annually. What they entirely missed was the trajectory of acceleration. The second ship required 180 days. The 10th required 105 days. By January 1942, construction time had compressed to 70 days. Then Henry Kaiser made an announcement that German intelligence dismissed as obvious propaganda. He would build a ship in 10 days. September 1942 arrived with German U-boats enjoying what submariners called their second happy time, sending 609,000 tons of Allied shipping to the ocean floor that month alone. At the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation's Portland Yard, Kaiser's workforce positioned the keel of the SS Joseph N. Teal at 12:01 a.m. on September 13th. What followed represented choreography at an industrial scale, a precisely orchestrated dance of American manufacturing capability. 3 rotating shifts of workers labored without cessation. Prefabricated sections, some weighing a quarter ton, ascended into position via massive cranes. Welders, numerous of them women who had never handled a torch 6 months prior, traced mile after mile of perfect welding beads. The workforce encompassed housewives, farmers, and store clerks, transformed into shipbuilders within weeks. Among them was Wendy the welder, known in her previous life as Janet Doyle, a former waitress who became renowned for welding speed. Alongside her worked Tom Washington, an African-American former sharecropper from Alabama, who had risen to master shipfitter, and Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American whose welding velocity exceeded standard German benchmarks. On September 23 at 4:30 p.m., the SS Joseph N. Teal glided into the Columbia River precisely 10 days after her keel had been positioned. In Berlin, German intelligence brushed aside the reports as exaggeration. Admiral Karl Dönitz informed his staff, "Even if this is accurate, It represents merely a theatrical demonstration. They cannot sustain such production levels. Yet Kaiser possessed other ambitions. He declared he could accomplish the impossible even faster. November 8, 1942, at 12:01 a.m., Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in California witnessed the commencement of another supreme effort. As German forces retreated from El Alamein, the keel of the SS Robert E. Peary was laid while hundreds of prefabricated sections, arranged with mathematical precision, surrounded the building ways. The entire vessel had, in essence, already been constructed, every component fashioned, fitted, and tested in workshops distributed throughout the yard. Kaiser had selected his most capable workers for this ultimate demonstration. Catherine Glasscock, formerly a schoolteacher, had become one of the yard's fastest welders, completing beads at 35 feet per hour, a speed German welders rarely approached. Richmond Jones, an African-American former sharecropper, maneuvered the primary crane with such precision that 250-ton sections descended within inches of their designated positions. Mary P. Lozano, just 19 years old and Italian-American, coordinated the electrical installation crew responsible for threading 5 miles of cable within 20 hours. Hour after hour, the ship materialized at impossible velocity. Hull plating welded into position within 6 hours. Sideshell sections erected within 18 hours. By the conclusion of the first day, observers could already discern a recognizable ship taking form. The prefabricated deckhouse, already equipped with plumbing and electrical systems installed at the factory, descended into position on day 2, a single lift that would have consumed an entire week in German shipyards. The engine, a 2,500 horsepower triple-expansion steam engine weighing 140 tons, lowered into the hull on day 3. It had been assembled in a factory, tested, partially disassembled for transport, and arrived with engineers capable of completing installation in hours rather than weeks. On November 12 at 3:30 p.m., the SS Robert E. Peary was launched. 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel was positioned. She displaced 14,245 tons and required only minimal outfitting before entering service. The impossible had transformed into routine. First credible reports reached Berlin in December 1942. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights employing long-range Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condors returned with photographs that German intelligence initially refused to acknowledge as genuine. The images revealed dozens of Liberty ships under simultaneous construction at single shipyards. Lieutenant Wilhelm Domes, analyzing the reconnaissance, counted over 200 ships in various stages of construction. His report, submitted December 15, 1942, contained a warning that shook even seasoned intelligence officers. If these observations prove accurate, American shipbuilding capacity exceeds our estimates by a factor of 10. The report was suppressed. Goring flatly refused to accept that his assessment had been fundamentally mistaken. "The photographs are deceptive," he instructed his staff. "The Americans are showing us identical ships photographed from different angles to create an illusion of mass production." Yet U-boat commanders began reporting troubling patterns. In January 1943, the captain of U-521 noted in his log, "Convoy HX-222 contained 47 merchant vessels, all appearing newly constructed, standard types obviously mass-produced. Where are these ships originating?" The answer lay everywhere. 18 American shipyards were now constructing Liberty ships simultaneously. The Bethlehem Fairfield Shipyard in Baltimore employed 47,000 workers and launched a ship every 4 days. California Shipbuilding Corporation completed one every 5 days. Workers who had never witnessed the ocean were building vessels faster than experienced German craftsmen could imagine. By March 1943, American shipyards were launching Liberty ships at rates that transcended German comprehension. 3 ships descended into the water daily. Donitz's staff performed calculations revealing that U-boats would require sinking 1.3 million tons monthly merely to achieve stalemate. The pinnacle month for submarine operations had been November 1942, when they sank 729,000 tons. They were already defeated, though few in Berlin comprehended this reality. Each Liberty ship demanded 250,000 separate components. The hull alone required 30,000 distinct pieces of steel, cut to exacting specifications. Electrical systems incorporated 25 miles of wiring. Piping stretched 3,500 feet throughout the vessel. The ships contained 2,500 valves and required 350 miles of welding. Yet American workers were assembling these extraordinarily complex machines in an average of 42 days by mid-1943. The workforce itself contradicted Nazi racial ideology at every level. Of the 650,000 Americans constructing ships, 200,000 were women. The legendary Rosies riveting together America's maritime fleet, proving through sheer output that gender possessed nothing to do with industrial capability. African Americans, whom Nazi doctrine categorized as inherently inferior, operated cranes with precision and laid welding beads exceeding German standards. In Kaiser's Richmond yards alone, integrated work crews, an impossibility under Nazi racial laws, were producing a ship every 51 hours by May 1943. The diversity extended beyond what Nazi theorists could have conceived. Chinese-American welders labored alongside Norwegian immigrants. Native American riveters from New Mexico collaborated with Jewish refugees who had fled Germany. Mexican-American women supervised crews that included poor whites from Appalachia. This coalition of the supposedly inferior was outproducing the German master race by margins that defied rational calculation. May 1943 arrived with Admiral Dönitz standing before Hitler in Wolfschanze in East Prussia. His news represented catastrophic failure. The month later designated Black May had witnessed U-boats sinking only 50 merchant vessels while losing 41 submarines in return. American shipyards were constructing vessels 3 times faster than U-boats could dispatch them to the ocean floor. Mein Führer, Dönitz reported with visible strain, the Americans launched 140 merchant vessels last month. We sank 41. At this rate, they will have replaced every ship lost since 1939 by year's end. Hitler's gaze shifted toward Göring, whose corpulent frame seemed to diminish beneath the weight of that look. The Führer's voice emerged quietly, each word laden with contempt. You assured me the Americans could only build consumer goods. The menace in his voice preceded the explosion everyone had come to dread. Göring's attempt to change the subject fell flat. These vessels, he said, grasping at anything, they're shoddy workmanship. They won't withstand rough seas. Hitler cut him off instantly. Intelligence reports indicate, he began. Your intelligence, Hitler interrupted sharply, is worthless. The numbers painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. American factories were churning out 8,000 aircraft every single month. German production, despite Albert Speer's best efforts, managed barely 2,000. American tank plants exceeded 2,000 monthly. Germany produced 500. The Liberty ships weren't just cargo vessels. They represented something far more troubling, an industrial machine that Germany simply couldn't compete with. On October 4, 1943, Göring addressed aircraft manufacturers, speaking the words that would echo back to haunt him. He still refused to accept reality, even as the evidence mounted around him. The Americans make grand claims, he told them flatly. 8,000 aircraft monthly, they say. It's simply impossible. Even if somehow true, their quality must suffer. He was clutching at straws, and deep down, he knew it. You cannot have both quantity and quality, he continued. It's one or the other. But Göring wasn't ignorant of the truth. Luftwaffe pilots had already sent back reports. The American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts were outflying German fighters. B-17s and B-24s arrived over Germany in formations of 1,000 bombers. The supposedly inferior American aircraft were reducing German cities to rubble. General Adolf Galland, head of fighter operations, confronted Göring after the speech. The air was tense between them. Reichsmarschall, I have studied captured American production documents, Galland said quietly. They're building 504 engine bombers every week. That's more fighters than we have in our entire inventory. Göring's face hardened. He refused to listen. Your refusal to acknowledge their capabilities, Galland pressed, has sealed our fate. Göring withdrew to Karinhall, his hunting estate, where he lost himself among the paintings and sculptures he'd taken from museums across Europe. The people with the clearest view of American manufacturing power were the submarine crews. They were seeing it firsthand, day after day. Captain Lieutenant Heinz Schaefer of U-977 documented what he witnessed. By late 1943, he wrote, the convoys had become truly massive. 80, 90, sometimes 100 ships, most of them fresh from American shipyards. We would sink one or two if fortune favored us, but it was like trying to empty the sea with a teaspoon. For every ship we destroyed, 3 more appeared. Oberleutnant Herbert Werner, commanding U-415, captured the horror of it all with brutal clarity. Through our periscope, we saw Liberty ships painted fresh grey, their hulls bearing every mark of mass production, welded seams instead of rivets. Identical fittings, every ship looking exactly like the last. They came in endless columns, each convoy bigger than the one before. We began to grasp the impossible truth. We weren't fighting merchant ships, we were fighting an entire system of production that could build replacements faster than we could sink them. The psychological toll was crushing. American radio announced new ship launches like baseball scores. German submariners stopped keeping count because the numbers were destroying their morale entirely. By January 1944, America was broadcasting production statistics directly to Germany as a weapon. German military intelligence could only listen as the announcements came across the airwaves. Ships delivered in 1943, 1,238 Liberty ships, 203 Victory ships, an improved design, 122 tankers, 367 military vessels. December 1943 alone saw the launch of 155 merchant ships, while American factories delivered 8,789 aircraft and completed 2,464 tanks. 153,000 military trucks rolled off the assembly lines. Wilhelm Sangen, heading the Reich Association of German Industry, brought his report to Hitler in February 1944. The picture he painted was grim. Americans are producing annually 100,000 aircraft to our 25,000, 50,000 tanks to our 19,000, 2.5 million military vehicles to our 100,000, 2,500 merchant ships to our 200. Sangen paused, choosing his words carefully. These ratios cannot be sustained for even another 12 months. Hitler grabbed the report and hurled it into the fireplace. Defeatist propaganda, he shouted. But Sangen had understated it. Actual American output in 1944 would surpass even these alarming projections. Independent verification came from Germany's allies in the East. Commander Toshikazu Ume, naval attaché at the Japanese embassy in Berlin, transmitted a coded message to Tokyo in March 1944. German leadership refuses to comprehend American production capacity. We have confirmed that Americans launched 173 vessels in February alone. German officials cannot bring themselves to believe these figures. Their denial clouds strategic assessment. Our recommendation to the Imperial Navy: American production capacity exceeds German estimates by a factor of 2, perhaps more. The Japanese fighting in the Pacific harbored no such illusions. Admiral Yamamoto had warned before the attack on Pearl Harbor, "I can attack for 6 months, perhaps more. Beyond that, I have no confidence in our success." He had grasped something Goering never would. That American industrial capacity, once fully mobilized, was practically limitless. June 6, 1944 arrived. D-Day became the ultimate proof of what American industry could accomplish. German defenders watched in stunned silence as an armada appeared on the horizon that seemed to defy comprehension. 6,939 vessels approached the beaches. Hundreds were Liberty ships crammed with supplies, vehicles, ammunition. General Wilhelm Richter, commanding the 716th Infantry Division, stared across the water in disbelief. The sea turns black with ships. They reach toward the horizon in every direction. This isn't an invasion, this is migration. Each Liberty ship represented 42 days of American factory work. Every tank rolling ashore was one of 88,410 America would produce during the war. Each Jeep was one of 639,245 manufactured on assembly lines. The landing craft themselves, thousands upon thousands of them, had come from places like Evansville and Quincy, built by Americans who'd never seen the ocean. Oberst Ernst Goth, defending Sword Beach, later reflected on the shock. "We'd been assured Americans were soft, that their soldiers would fold under pressure, that their weapons were inferior. I watched their engineers construct a floating harbor in 5 days that rivaled most German ports. Their vehicles climbed our obstacles like they were nothing. Their supposedly inferior fighters swept our Luftwaffe from the skies." Even as American bombs fell on Berlin in February 1945, Goering maintained his delusion. He told his staff members, his voice firm with conviction, "American production numbers are propaganda. Many ships are probably wooden facades, built just for show." His deputy, General Karl Koller, recorded the moment in his diary. "The Reichsmarschall lives in a fantasy world. Yesterday, 1,000 American bombers destroyed Cologne. He insists they cannot possibly have built so many aircraft." Koller had shown him serial numbers from crashed bombers. 15,000 B-17s and B-24s had been positively identified. Goering accused him of defeatism. The actual truth was staggering. America had manufactured 31,000 four-engine bombers by war's end, 18,482 B-24 Liberators, 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. This single aircraft type exceeded Germany's total aircraft production for the entire war. When Americans entered the Reich Air Ministry in May 1945, they discovered Goering's intelligence files. Report after report, warning of American industrial capacity, bore his personal notation. Unreliable, enemy propaganda. One June 1943 report described an American shipyard visible from neutral waters where workers had counted 17 Liberty ships simultaneously under construction, with new vessels completing every 3 days. Goering had written across the margin, "Impossible, agent fabricating or mentally unstable." Another report from December 1943 announced the completion of the 1,000th Liberty ship. Goering's notation was blunt. Propaganda, real total probably under 200. Major William Hutchinson, examining the files afterward, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "The delusion was absolute," he wrote. "They possessed accurate intelligence, but rejected it entirely because accepting it would contradict their racial ideology and their assumptions about America. They chose blindness over truth." At Nuremberg in 1946, Goering faced the statistics directly. 2,710 Liberty ships, 531 Victory ships, 296,429 aircraft, 88,410 tanks, 2,383,311 military trucks. Goering's response was immediate. "These represent quantity, not quality." Germany pursued quality over mere numbers. Prosecutor Robert Jackson produced a captured German report from 1944, authored by Goering's own staff. It admitted what Goering would not. American aircraft surpassed German designs in every category: speed, range, armament, reliability, all of them. Goering fell silent. His face went blank. Later, speaking with psychiatrist Dr. Gustav Gilbert, Goering finally released the truth he'd held inside. "I misjudged the Americans. I believed they were soft, corrupted by comfort and wealth. When I said they could only manufacture consumer goods, I genuinely believed it. It was the single worst mistake I made. They buried us under an avalanche of manufacturing." Germany's refusal to accept American capacity carried devastating consequences. Admiral Dönitz ordered the U-boat campaign to continue even when mathematics showed victory impossible. 40,000 men served on U-boats. 28,000 died, a 70% casualty rate, the highest of any service in any nation. Those men perished trying to destroy ships that were being manufactured faster than they could sink them. 433,000 Luftwaffe personnel died. They were fighting an enemy producing 50 aircraft for every German plane. The submarine losses tell the story clearly. Germany constructed 162 U-boats during the war. They sank almost 3,000 Allied vessels, 175 warships, and 2,825 merchant ships. The Allies constructed 5,777 merchant vessels. For every ship sank, 2 were built. The mathematics was merciless, even when Reichsmarschalls weren't. Behind the Liberty ships stood 18 million Americans engaged in war production, more workers than Germany's entire military forces. The Richmond shipyards alone employed 93,000 workers at their peak, more than Germany's complete shipbuilding industry. These workers came from everywhere, demolishing Nazi theories about racial and social organization. Emma Martinez, Mexican-American welder at Todd Houston, completed 300 feet of perfect welding each shift, outpacing German welders. Dorothy Luck, once a housewife from Oakland, became a crane operator moving 250-ton loads. Thomas Washington, African-American from Alabama, became a shipfitter whose precision work exceeded German standards. They worked in environments that would have been impossible under Nazism. Integrated dining facilities despite local segregation, childcare centers for working mothers, medical services free of charge. Workers earned $1.20 hourly, more than skilled German workers earned daily. They purchased war bonds with surplus earnings while German workers faced execution for missing quotas. The comparison was stark. American workers volunteered for overtime willingly. German factories depended increasingly on forced labor from conquered regions, workers who sabotaged production whenever possible. American workers' children attended school. German teenagers were pressed into anti-aircraft units. American workers proposed improvements that saved production. German workers risked execution for merely suggesting problems. The Liberty ships embodied American innovation Germany couldn't replicate. Welding superseded riveting, cutting construction time by 30% and reducing weight by 600 tons. Lincoln Electric Company pioneered the technique, so sophisticated that German engineers examined it in operation and declared it impossible before witnessing demonstrations with their own eyes. The prefabrication techniques America achieved went far beyond anything Germany ever managed. Complete deckhouses came together miles away from the actual shipyards, already equipped with every plumbing line, electrical wire, and piece of furniture built in. These massive structures traveled on specially designed rail cars and got lifted by enormous cranes capable of handling 250 tons, 5 times more than the largest cranes Germany's shipyards could operate. The approach to production itself was nothing short of revolutionary. In Kaiser's yards, assembly line methods meant workers focused on one specific skill over and over. A welder might spend months perfecting the exact same joint, reaching speeds and precision that traditional shipbuilding methods could never touch. The difference was staggering. The learning curve moved so fast that people who'd never laid eyes on a ship in July were outproducing German workers with years of experience by December. Every Liberty ship needed materials sourced from across America, coordinated with a precision German logistics experts swore was impossible. Steel plates from Pittsburgh showed up exactly when the yards needed them. Engines from Toledo arrived complete and already tested. Electrical generators from Schenectady appeared right on schedule. The entire rail network supporting this incredible operation moved amounts of material that seemed impossible. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone transported 50 million tons of war materials during 1943. This exceeded everything Germany's entire rail system could move, and they were doing it while still running civilian passenger trains. Major Hans Kehl, a German logistics officer who reviewed American production after the fighting ended, later wrote that his country struggled just to supply single factories. America, by contrast, supplied entire industries. Germans counted boxcars, Americans counted trainloads. Germans planned in weeks, Americans planned in years. As Liberty ships continued flowing from the yards, Americans kept making them better. Victory ships that appeared in 1944 moved faster, 15 to 17 knots instead of 11. They were bigger and more sophisticated, yet they came off the ways almost as quickly, averaging just 42 days to complete. The Victory ship program showed America's remarkable ability to improve designs while keeping mass production humming smoothly. New turbine engines replaced older systems. Improved hull designs added both speed and cargo capacity. Better ventilation systems kept cargo in better condition. Advanced navigation equipment enhanced safety. Every improvement got built in without slowing the overall process. Germany's attempts at improvement told a completely different story. Their Type 21 submarine program, meant to enhance their undersea fleet, turned into complete chaos. Exactly 4 Type 21 U-boats became operational before the war ended. While America launched 531 Victory ships in just 18 months, the economic gap between the two nations made Goering's initial confidence seem delusional from the beginning. The numbers painted a brutal picture. In 1941, America's gross domestic product reached $126 billion, while Germany's stood at $35 billion. American steel production hit 80 million tons, compared to Germany's 20 million. The electricity picture was just as lopsided. America generated 26 billion kilowatt-hours, while Germany produced 8 billion. During the war years, American production climbed 170%. Germany managed only a 30% increase, despite Albert Speer's frantic efforts. By 1944, America spent $90 billion yearly on war, more than Germany's entire pre-war GDP. The Liberty ship program alone cost $4.6 billion, surpassing what Germany spent on their entire U-boat fleet. Dr. Rolf Wagenführer, who headed German wartime statistics, calculated after the war that America outproduced Germany by ratios that seemed almost impossible: 6-to-1 in raw materials, 8-to-1 in finished goods, 12-to-1 in transportation capacity. His conclusion was stark: we were not defeated, we were buried. American production transformed into a weapon of its own. The Office of War Information broadcast production figures to Germany, wanting their soldiers to know the truth. German troops heard America was building a ship every 8 hours, a plane every 5 minutes, a tank every 7 minutes. They didn't believe it until they saw it themselves. Soldier Helmut Romer, defending Normandy, remembered the shock. Americans announced 10,000 planes would come for the invasion. We laughed. Then the sky turned black with aircraft. Everything they said was propaganda turned out to be true. Everything our leaders told us was true turned out to be propaganda. Each Liberty ship became a symbol of American industrial power. German propaganda tried painting them as ugly, slow vessels unworthy of respect, but U-boat crews knew better. One captured submarine commander told his interrogators that when convoys of 50, 60, even 70 of these ships appeared on the horizon, the realization hit like ice water. We knew the war was lost. Numbers don't lie, particularly when politicians do. After Germany surrendered, American investigators talked to German industrial leaders about their wartime judgments. Their answers condemned Goering's assessment with grim consistency. Fritz Thyssen, the steel magnate who'd helped Hitler come to power, was blunt. Goering lived in fantasy. He visited America in the 1920s, but he only saw speakeasies and jazz clubs. He never toured steel mills or automobile plants. His ignorance cost Germany the war. Albert Speer was more cutting still. Goering's dismissal of American production amounted to criminal negligence. By the time I took over as armaments minister, it was far too late. The Americans produced monthly what took us an entire year. Liberty ships were simply the visible proof of an industrial superiority we could never match. Even Alfred Krupp, whose factories represented the pinnacle of German industry, had to admit the truth. We produced the finest steel in the world, but in craftsman quantities. The Americans produced decent steel in quantities like an ocean. One Liberty ship used enough steel for 50 Tiger tanks. They built 2,110 Liberty ships. We built 1,347 Tiger tanks. The math speaks for itself. The Soviet Union, America's ally but ideological opponent, stood equally amazed at American industrial capacity. Liberty ships became the lifeline not just for Britain, but for the entire Soviet war effort. Marshal Georgy Zhukov wrote in his memoirs that America provided 400,000 trucks, 13,000 tanks, 15,000 aircraft, and 17 million tons of supplies. But what truly struck him was the Liberty ships themselves, pushing through Arctic waters under constant German attack, each one that reached Murmansk representing a triumph of American production over German submarines. Without these ships, the Soviets couldn't have driven to Berlin. Nikita Khrushchev, overseeing Ukrainian industrial production during the conflict, was equally direct. Without American trucks, we couldn't have moved our artillery. Without American steel, we couldn't have manufactured our tanks. Without American food, we couldn't have fed our soldiers. Those Liberty ships brought everything imaginable, from boots to telephone wire to spam. Goering's dismissal of American industry became a gift to the Soviet Union, meaning Germany underestimated the force supplying both sides against them. Soviet Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov added his perspective. German U-boats sank many ships in the Arctic convoys, true, but the Americans built 3 more for every one the Germans destroyed. The Germans could sink ships, the Americans could build oceans of them. The final numbers tell the complete story. Liberty ships, 2,710 built across 18 shipyards, averaging 42 days to completion by 1943. The fastest took just 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes. Total tonnage reached 292,092 tons. Each ship cost an average of $1.8 million. Total merchant vessel production reached 5,777 ships of all types, representing 56 million deadweight tons, more than all other nations combined. At peak, 1.7 million workers filled the shipyards, with 600,000 women comprising 35% of the workforce and 250,000 African Americans making up 14%. Average wages ran $1.20 per hour. The production comparison between nations was staggering. America built 296,429 aircraft versus Germany's 167,000. Tanks, 88,410 versus 67,429. Trucks, 2,383,311 versus 350,000. Military vehicles, 257,390 versus 159,147. And machine guns, 2,679,840 versus 100,000. Ammunition measured in billions, 41 billion rounds fired from American weapons against Germany's 8 billion. In the submarine war, Germany built 1,162 U-boats while losing 785 of them. German submarines sank almost 3,000 Allied vessels. Yet America built 5,177 merchant ships, netting a gain of almost 3,000 vessels. The math was relentless. Liberty ships transformed far more than military strategy. They reshaped society itself. Shipyard integration, though limited by local laws, provided a blueprint for post-war civil rights progress. Women demonstrated industrial capacity permanently, reshaping the American workforce forever. Kaiser's worker healthcare system evolved into Kaiser Permanente, now serving 12 million Americans. Techniques pioneered in Liberty ship construction revolutionized global shipbuilding. Welding replaced riveting worldwide. Prefabrication became the industry standard. Assembly line concepts influenced post-war Japanese and Korean shipbuilders, who eventually surpassed American production using methods Americans invented. Most significantly, Liberty ships proved democracy could mobilize more effectively than totalitarianism, that free workers outproduced forced labor, that diversity represented strength rather than weakness. They vindicated Roosevelt's vision of America as democracy's arsenal. At Nuremberg, awaiting execution, Goering maintained his aristocratic composure, though he could no longer escape reality. In his final statement to the court, he sidestepped the subject of American production entirely. The silence itself an admission. On October 15, 1946, 2 hours before his scheduled execution, Goering swallowed a cyanide capsule. He died finally understanding his misconceptions. To the prison psychiatrist, Dr. Gustav Gilbert, Goering made his last confession about American industry. He said he should have recognized it. A nation building the Empire State Building in 410 days could build anything. But he'd believed the propaganda about American decadence. Liberty ships should have been called victory ships from the start. They were German defeat made tangible. 2 Liberty ships still operate today: the SS John W. Brown and SS Jeremiah O'Brien. They remain the last working witnesses to history's greatest industrial feat. When they pass the Statue of Liberty on memorial voyages, their whistles sound across waters where U-boats once hunted, reminding us of when democracy faced threats from those convinced it was fragile. Edward Ellsberg, who supervised salvage operations at Normandy, captured what Liberty ships truly meant. They were plain, slow, and simple. Yet thousands of them appeared, carrying Sherman tanks and candy bars, ammunition and blood plasma. They connected American factories to fighting men and women. Americans could only manufacture consumer goods, critics insisted. They were wrong. America could manufacture anything, including victory. The 2007-10 Liberty ships stand as lasting proof of the danger in underestimating democracy based on bias and false assumptions. While Goering clung to fantasies about American weakness, American workers demonstrated that in democracy's arsenal, the only real limitation was imagination, and the only shortage was adversaries foolish enough to test its potential. Liberty ships were never merely cargo vessels. They were 10,000-ton evidence that freedom, properly mobilized, could outproduce tyranny by margins, making military skill almost irrelevant. They proved wars could be won in factories as decisively as on battlefields, and that those dismissing industrial might in favor of racial ideology do so at catastrophic cost.